So, Byron, what do you do if someone is trespassing on your property? Based on the current law, that person is committing an offence and is fined 2,000 Rand or up to 2 years in jail, like no questions
Mm.
asked. The ANC sees this current law as colonial, as apartheid like, so therefore they want to upgrade the trespass law, and they've published the bill for that law, which will become the law in time to come. So a lot of people are reading it and like, yeah, seems okay, but there are a few issues with it. So I thought perhaps you and I could go through together and point out the deficiencies that stings a little bit of ANC ideology for the most part.
Yeah, it does a little bit. So obviously, this is a reference to the Trespass Act of was it 1960? I don't know, 1960 something.
Somewhere around
I
there.
actually read the act. Yes, I actually read the act yesterday, and it look when you say it's colonial, it's distinctly colonial, man. Like the actual prefix of it, the first line of it is Her Majesty the Queen, like says something, something, something. So it is one of those kind of really old school kind of laws. However, the law is like less than an A4 page, man. It's small, and it does literally say exactly what you said. If a guy's on your property, he's not there lawfully, he's a trespasser, and therefore there's a consequence of that. That's the end of it. Um, Now, obviously, that has consequences to the modern ANC kind of brigade. And let's just remind ourselves quickly before we dissect the new law where this came from. And it actually came from, if you remember, there was a case with Juju where he was inciting so called people to invade land. And when they were saying, well, actually, technically, this is in violation of the Trespass Act, he was like, I'm not paying attention to that because that's a colonial kind of piece of legislation, and that's just apartheid and racist and all the other rubbish that goes with it. And he tried to take it to the constitutional court to get his judgment squashed. So this was going to happen eventually, I suppose, and obviously it's now happened. So let's actually just go through what the bill proposal says, and let's go through it. Have you got it?
It's all up here. So, like the main points, right? We'll go through them. If someone unlawfully gains entry to an enclosed property without permission from the property owner or lawful occupier, they are guilty of an offence. I agree with that. No stress, no
I
harm.
agree with that.
Number two, property owners need to put up clear signage or give an oral warning to the perpetrator that indicates that entry is prohibited. So you're shifting the onus onto the property owner to tell the suspect or potential suspect that what they're doing is unlawful. Why? I mean, the assumption of private property is quite clear, especially if there's walls, especially if there's electric fence in residential areas. And in farms, fences are meant for that. They keep livestock in, but they also
Mm,
determine the boundaries of something. What do you think of that?
correct. I think that it's very interesting that they have placed that onus on the general public because it would imply. Remember that this act, when you read it, even in the definitions, it doesn't distinguish what type of property it's referring to. So it doesn't say this is only relating to, I don't know, vacant fields or factories or whatever. It just says trespass in general, which means residential houses are included. So this would imply that every residential house now needs to go get a sign and put it out the front that says no trespassing, you will be prosecuted. Um, but I can also see how that would become problematic. Let's say you're on a, I don't know, 80-hectare piece of land. How often would you have to space the signs? If you had one sign at the front, which was visible at that area, but it's an 80-hectare property, well, do you have to put one every so many meters
Yeah.
apart?
But
Like
what happens if a
how
gang
prominent does
of
it have to be?
burglars are coming in and now you have to give a warning to them, like, hey, this is private property?
I
Like,
think
then
I
it's
think
like a
the
speed
sign will
point
count it
you.
because it says and or. So I think the
Right.
sign does count as the warning. But that's why I'm saying how prominent does the sign? How prominent would the sign then have to be? If you had an 80-hectare property, would you have to put one like every meter? Does it have to be like big and in bold, or like what does that prominence look like? Is it a small strip? Like that's a big onus to put on a property owner.
Yeah,
Especially, like if you look at some farms, the boundary might be there, but the fence itself is only like a wire mesh.
yeah, it's
So
a,
it's
a
and
cattle
to actually
fence. It's like hip
cattle
high.
fence, and it's, how would you put a sign on there that says no trespassers? And I would venture to say it's actually almost impossible to have one that's prominent everywhere, or at least the costs of doing so would be prohibitive. So
Yeah.
that's a bit strange.
So yeah, it's a bit of an onus on property owners. I mean, we can sort of understand it, but yeah, it's a bit of a niggle there. Number three, this is the one that annoys me the most. Owners or lawful occupiers can call the police to apprehend trespassers.
Yeah.
So this act, if you read, well, the entire act is linked below, by the way. If you read it, basically only the police is allowed to do anything concerning trespassing.
Yeah.
Knowing the police is not great at doing their job, knowing the police are far away, especially from rural areas like farms, and knowing that the police are not to be trusted for the most part, this seems like a very deliberate way to say that, well, we don't actually give a shit about trespassing because the act is the police must act, but the police don't act, so oh well, it's
Yeah.
there.
I mean,
You must just follow it.
I I find it very weird that they're saying, and if you read it, it does say specifically the South African Police Service. So they have designated exactly who they think should be responsible for this, and that is SAPS. But considering that 90% of the time SAPS don't arrive, or if they do arrive, they arrive tomorrow, or if they arrive late. I mean, the response times from SAPS are pretty bad. Sometimes SAPS's interpretation of the law, I mean, we spoke about this off air. We were talking about, SAPS's ability to actually even understand what's going on in the law is like almost non-existent. These guys aren't lawyers, and quite often their training in law is substandard.
Very.
So you're putting a very kind of legal responsibility on a police officer that may not even pitch up. I'm surprised that they haven't included all kind of, should we say, lawful agents and then defined what a lawful agent was, which could even be municipal police. How come it's not like metro police or municipal police or law enforcement? How come it's not private security? And I know the answer to this. They don't
Mm,
want private security
yeah.
to be able to remove people.
How come the owner is not allowed to remove trespassers? The owner himself or herself or zero self, whatever gender binary they want to choose, the owner themselves cannot remove someone who is
Mm,
trespassing on their land. They have to call the police specifically to do that job, knowing full well the police will probably not arrive, or if they will, they arrive in 5 hours, and by then the offense is way over. That's the
mm,
big stickler. That's the big problem with this law. It gives onus to the police to do something, knowing full well the police don't do much.
mm. But let's go on to the defenses. There's some interesting old defenses here to when actually aren't you committing a trespass?
Yeah, so trespassers can defend against the charge if A, there's a reasonable belief that they have title or interest on the premises that entitles
Mm,
them to enter the property. That is very vague and can mean a whole lot of things. So, hypothetically, you can be playing soccer on the street and kick the ball over a boundary wall. Now you have a vested interest in getting your soccer ball back. You have,
correct.
and that is, so if you do trespass, you can say, well, I just wanted to get the soccer ball back because it's my property that fell over your boundary wall. That
And I
is,
have a legal interest.
yeah, and that is a legitimate defense at a most basic level according to this act. So it gives a whole lot of vague loopholes for not good people to trespass in
Mm.
your land.
But I think the more interesting one comes in and where they actually have gone through and said legitimate interest, and it says that you reasonably believe. So it's the rule of it's the rule of subjectivity. It's about me. It's about what I think. It's not about what the objective or the reasonable man thinks. It's about what I think. And so if I think that this used to be my ancestors' land 200 years ago, and therefore I'm trespassing here because it's my land and I've got an interest and you stole back my land, is that a legitimate interest? And it would be implied that, yeah, it might be. But that's the problem. As we've already said, you're giving very legalistic rights to a police officer who has to make a judgment call. The judgment call is, have you breached this act, yes or no? Have you trespassed sufficiently that I must remove you? Well, imagine rocking up to a scene and then you say to the police officer, "Nah, these whiteys stole my land 200 years ago. I'm now on here because it's mine." Like, I can't see what would go wrong, Ramon. I can't see how the police officer would make a bad choice in this instance. It's not like it's never happened in South Africa before where the police officers make a wrong choice. And then the rights of legal recourse is like, well, only they can remove anyway. So now you're
Yeah,
stuck.
indeed.
So now what do you do?
And people might disbelieve me, but here's the official bill right in front of you where a person may not be convicted for an offence under this act if they have the consent of the lawful occupier, they have other lawful authorities, so I suppose like the sheriff or the police or something like that, or they really believe they had title or an interest in the premises that entitled them to enter the premises. So if you want to look at your ancestors' grave site from 300 years ago and you make the assumption that it's over there on that private property, that is a legal interest or a personal interest in
Or
going
could,
there.
we can't say it is. We could say it could be interpreted to be. We don't
Well,
actually know how they're going to
yeah,
interpret this yet, but
no,
it's
true.
likely that that's what will happen.
But it's so vague that it is likely that would happen. That's the problem. Like
Correct.
they don't specify specific grounds on what it means to have an interest in the premises. They just say have an interest in the premises. Can mean a lot
Correct.
of things to very different people,
Correct. Correct.
and that's essentially
But I
the
think
act.
there is other parts of this as well. So if you go a little bit further, it does say one of the other exemptions are when you actually have the. Basically, it says that you've got the keys to the premises. If you've got the keys to the premises, it's basically presuming that you actually have a right to be there, because otherwise, how did you have the keys to the premises? Well, what if you got mugged on your driveway? Like you came home, you pulled your car in, they stole your keys. Now they got your keys, so they let themselves in with your stolen keys. Does that mean they have a right to be there? And they're not
Yeah,
actually trespassing now?
maybe they just want to prevent like evictions of like tenants or something, which is also covered by Pi and that act. So yeah,
Then it's not trespass, right?
no, I suppose not.
But the final point to concentrate on this is something that I suppose we haven't really talked about, or you haven't talked about. It's the penalty. Penalty is a fixed notice, mate. That's it. It's fixed notice. There's no prison. There's no
Well,
imprisonment. There's no
it,
detention.
there
It's a fixed
is.
penalty.
No, 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 no.
It's 2 grand.
So that was the old act. So this one is they're liable to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 2 years, or both to such fine and such imprisonment. So they do have it there. They just don't say what fine or what imprisonment happens. So under the old act, there was a penalty of 2,000 rand. Under this new one, they just say fine and or prison and or both.
You sure it's not the other way around? I don't know. I'd have to relook at it. I'm sure you're right.
It's on the screen for people to see. I'm not lying to you, my friend. I'm not lying to you. But yeah, anyway, that's the new Trespass Act. So we have a lot of major concerns with this, notably that only SAPS can remove the trespasser, only SAPS can remove the structures that trespasser has created, and only SAPS is obligated and allowed to act on any acts of trespassing in the entire nation. And SAPS don't act on anything. So it basically makes trespassing illegal in law, but in reality, not so much.
Yeah, there's too many. How should we say? There's too many loopholes. I mean, number one, if you don't have a prominent sign that says no trespassing, does that mean they're not trespassing? Because that's a requirement to have trespass. Number two, if they have a legitimate reason to be there, can you exclude them from the premises because they're not technically trespassing? They can enjoy your land. It's like, okay. Number three, if they stole your keys and they get into your properties, that's not trespass now. It's a bit strange. If number four, if like you got these weird kind of like, I mean, we've seen this even with Amazon right now. Amazon trying to build some properties in Cape Town, all of a sudden this weird fictitious organization has come out challenging them as the real Khoisan, and it's their land and it's sacred, and nobody's ever heard of this stuff before, but now all of a sudden, because there's an interest in the land, they're all over the show. And the high courts have actually sided with these people and said, oh, Amazon needs to engage in legitimate kind of engagements and all the other bullshit that's gone with it. So the reality is, and that's why I say, you're giving those powers to SAPs and then asking SAPs to do the interpretation of it. The SAPs are useless, man. And like a lot of the, should we say, the beat cops are just kind of morons. Like they don't know what the law is anyway. Anybody who's ever been stopped with a firearm at a checkpoint knows. Like these guys don't even know what the Firearms Control Act is. Like look during lockdown, they were telling you that the rules were X, Y, Z, and 90% of the time, you had the police minister on beaches telling you couldn't do things that you could. Even he didn't know what the law was. So are these really the right people to be enforcing this? I
No,
have my doubts, man, and I think the entire thing is fraught with possibilities of corruption.
yeah, they need to put an amendment in where the owner can take action, where security guards can take action, where employees can take action. Leaving it in the hands of SAPs is just a disaster and something that, well,
100%.
only a moron would want. Which begs the question: what are they
Yeah,
trying
but I
to
think
do?
the ANC does want it because if you think about it, it's a nice way to kind of water down property rights, though, isn't
No,
it? It's a
absolutely,
really nice way to do it because then you
absolutely.
basically say, well, somebody could be on your land and you can do nothing about it. So I don't think this is accidental. I'm pretty sure, as we've sat here and said, could this? I'm pretty sure they've thought the same.
Oh, exactly,
So
exactly. That's a good way to water down property rights. So there you go. That's the act. I will leave it in the description for you to read it. And thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.
take it easy. Cheers.